Good morning, everyone. I hope you're as excited to be here as me. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking to you about social network theory. Relax. I'm not going to bore you to death. I'm not going to take you there. I could if you want to, though. I'm going to talk about digital at scale. For us, scale is a massively important word. It's a very scary word because our budgets are never, and this is going to sound strange, but our budgets are never large enough for us to operate at the scale that we need to, given the penetration of our brands and how much they are a part of our consumers' lives. So for us, scale is an interesting question. So with that, let me just get into this. I'm frightfully nervous, more nervous than usual, because I know there's a clock facing you as well, and it's the first time I've ever presented with that, and you can all kick me off the stage. So I'm going to try and talk quickly. I thought I'd start with this slide. So this just explains how we think about the world in a sense, and I feel I should give credit to the guy I work for, who I think was mentioned yesterday by Jeff, Frank Cooper, who's our CMO of Global Consumer Engagement. And the way he frames this up, and this is so that you understand everything I talk about further downstream, is we as a business at PepsiCo, we need to create value for our consumers. We as a business need to do so that we make profits for our shareholders, and that translates into higher price points. The more of a transactional relationship we have with our consumers, the more that gets hurt. So we're fundamentally in the business of human connections, engaging more deeply with our consumers, driving purchases from our loyalists, and exploring new lines of revenues always. So that's how we fundamentally, and at the most basic level, think about our marketing efforts and how we struggle and play with that tension point of the fact that we as a business can never be at the same scale that our products are, which is a very strange place to be in, but that's just the nature of our business. So with that, I'm going to talk a bit about digital at scale, then how we approach it, some new novel things that we're thinking of, and then I'm going to talk about some risk areas around it. So first, digital at scale. There are 30 billion status updates published on Facebook. No one needs to hear how fabulous or how big Facebook is, but for me it has a very different meaning. I hate Facebook. The reason why I hate Facebook is every single one of those stupid status updates competes with what I want to tell my consumers. And it's just the nature of the world that we live in. My life gets exponentially harder the more successful Facebook is. It also makes it more exciting, but Facebook's on scale, digital's on scale. Similarly, just last week, Dick and the other guys at Twitter announced that you now have 200 million tweets being published every single day. Crazy number of tweets. Here again, how I and how my teams, how we participate with our consumers quickly can get lost in that unless we're delivering meaningful experiences. So that's another challenge to us. So here again, I love and I hate Twitter. Third thing, this one I actually like a little more, being a digital guy. I'm amazed by how big and how exponentially online video is growing. And how for the first time ever, we as brands can look at it as a viable alternative to TV advertising. That number has 135 million on it because this summer I ran an online marketing program. It was for Pepsi, and we put a certain piece of advertising in front of 135 million consumers just in the span of a weekend. It was online video. Never before could we have done that. This thing's on scale. It complements traditional advertising very nicely. We absolutely love it. I do love Facebook and Twitter too, in case someone took that too seriously. And then the other interesting factor as we look at digital going on scale, time spent online is growing exponentially. There are like 100 different studies on this, a lot competing with each other. I like to use this piece of Forrester research because it tells the most favorable story, but it shows how much time is spent using the internet compared to TV or radio or newspapers or magazines. Where it gets even more interesting is when you think about those other channels, in a sense, moving online as well. So no question, digital is on scale. What matters is, are brands on scale? Are we operating on scale? are we really taking advantage of that? And what are the risks and opportunities? So how do we operate on scale? So I'm going to talk about one or two examples and take it from there. So first and foremost, how many of you here do not know about the Pepsi Refresh project? Love it. Just 3 or 4 people. Where were you guys the last 2 years? I don't know. Just kidding. But this is an example of doing something on a mass scale, and it makes me very happy to see that everyone's familiar with it. To give you an example of some of the statistics around this, we had 87 million votes on the Refresh Everything website, more votes than any presidential candidate in history, mass engagement. We had 183,000 ideas started, ideas to change the world, to move their communities forward. Remember, the Refresh project was started at a time, well, I thought it was in the past tense, but we are back there, unfortunately. But at a time when the economy was in a very bad shape, and everyone was thinking about how can we, do our own bit to help each other and move the country forward. So there are 183,000 ideas, millions of unique visitors to our website around this. So the interesting thing about this is we talk about content, we talk about adding value to our consumers, but nothing beats looking at that in the broadest definition of experiences, letting it start and end with consumers, letting them co-create at every stage in the process, and just being the enablers for it. And that's what the Refresh project did. This is just a very quick analysis of some of the research and metrics that we did around it, but it had an extremely positive impact on our brand. Last year, this year, the Refresh project has a direct tie to sales. Last, it was designed as a brand building program. This year, we actually tie how many people goes by our products through it immediately, and it's doing an immense amount for us. And the exciting thing about it is it's also become a model for a lot of other brands as they think about what's the future of marketing and the role that engaging with consumers through deep experiences plays in it. It's not just static advertising. It incorporated every other form of advertising that we have into this bigger experiential play. So as we operate on scale, what are some of the takeaways from this? 1, engagement at scale is a real possibility. For a long time, we've thought we liked engagement, but we can't do it on scale. As soon as we start talking about Twitter or Facebook or consumers on those platforms, all of a sudden, from talking about the tens of millions of consumers or users, we'd suddenly, remove a few zeros and be talking about thousands or 10,000s, and we'd be very excited, but we'd be a little nervous about it. That's all changing. It's happening on a mass scale. The interesting piece about this, though, is knowing what that engagement is very hard. It's definitely not about like counts. It's definitely not about impressions. It's definitely not about just awareness of a program. It is about pushing that further engagement, because we live in a world where consumers have infinite choices, and the brands that cultivate and move their loyalists most forward and then have their loyalists do the marketing for them are the ones that are going to succeed. So that's something very important to always think about. Second thing, it's harder and it takes investments and experiences. I mean, my whole budgeting is a complete mess. Please don't tweet that, but it's the reality. Because for a long time, I had a really neat separate digital media budget. I had a very neat separate social media budget. Then I had my website maintenance and management budget. And then I had my mobile budget and my promotions budget and my measurement budget. It was all nice and neatly separated and bucketed out. Guess what? In a world of experiences where the lines between content and advertising blur, that digital media budget and that website budget and that mobile and promotion budget all get mashed together. And it's a mess. It just is. The other piece that's interesting about it is we always thought that with our partners, with our media partners, we'd look at them as partners on which we'd run advertising and any deep experiences we do on our own websites. But guess what? Those worlds are blurring too. Sometimes it makes much more sense for us to create deep experiences on our partner websites, on the media companies, in other cases, on our own websites. They serve as content creators for us, not just as providers of IAB unit advertising spaces. So everything is changing up and down, but it takes new ways of modeling and managing fund budgets. The measurement is a lot more complex, but a lot more valuable. As soon as we move away and beyond impressions and treat impressions as a starting point versus an end goal, everything changes. And then fourthly, I would say, without a doubt, and I don't know why I use the word probably there, I take that back. Without a doubt, deep, meaningful experiences are the best way to build brand loyalty. No question. Those deep experiences can be built today on a mass scale. Yes, they can happen through digital. They can happen, in the real world at events. They can happen or start to happen through television. But experiences are the future, no question. And the Pepsi Refresh project, with its digital elements, its offline elements, was a good example of that. So that's one example. Second thing is, the way we scale and the way we get to scale is getting even more interesting. And this is where technology is changing everything, and it makes me extremely, extremely excited. So how many of you are familiar with the X factor? Okay, so I'd say half the room. You don't match the Pepsi Refresh project crowd, but getting there. So just for context, the X Factor is launching this fall on September 21st on Fox. It's a reality TV show. It's going to compete with American Idol. It's very big internationally. 2 of the 4 judges are Simon Cowell and Paula Abdul. So you can only imagine the fireworks and the craziness that awaits us all with it. It's going to be a really big thing. So we at Pepsi, we're the anchor sponsors for it, and we're doing a whole bunch of really interesting things. We're creating a whole bunch of really interesting experiences. But I want to talk about one of them. It's a very simple experience, but I think it's going to be really exciting. And it starts with this. So we have our packaging, and as you know, we're a mass-scale brand. We're in hundreds and hundreds of millions of places, in terms of our package distribution, whether it's our bottles or, the cartons or whatever it may be. And for a long time, if we go back 5, 8, 10, 12, maybe even 14 years, the way we think about retail promotions would be very simple. It would be UTC programs, under-the-cap programs. You open a drink, you see a code, you type it in online, you get entered to do a sweepstakes. It was very simple, very straightforward, very transactional oriented. What we're doing with the X factors on all our packaging, so those hundreds of millions of packages around the country, and you're starting to see them, you're going to see the Pepsi logo and the X Factor logo over there. And you can do something really interesting with it. With your cell phone, you can take a photograph of it, and then you can either email it or SMS it. And as soon as you do, you SMS it to a specific address, you're entered into a whole new digital world. So think about it. Our point of entry for our consumers into the digital ecosystem around this massive X Factor sponsorship starts with our product. Our product, which has mass distribution, greater distribution than any other way for us to engage with our consumers. It's a physical product. It goes home to our consumers. It goes into their lives. That's the starting point. The interesting thing about this also, so this is the site that you get taken to. You get entered to win a sweepstakes, but you also get exclusive content. And during the course of the show, every single day, we're going to be giving tickets away to the X Factor. Every single day. And every single day, there's going to be a sweepstakes. And every single day, we are going to be publishing exclusive content about whether it's Simon Cowell and how obnoxious he's being, or Paul Abdul, or the contestants, or the gossip around the show, or who's likely to win. Every single day, yes, we're taking content creation on a mass scale. We're going to be doing this every day, and it's going to be all driven through our product. And that presents a very exciting opportunity. So just to summarize, we believe physical and digital gives explosive scale, and it's extremely exciting for me. So there are daily ticket giveaways for the X Factor. There's exclusive content about the contestants and the judges and the show. My favorite, no QR code requirement. We woke up one morning and realized, guess what? QR code penetration, I have to thank Comscore for this, is 6% of the population today. Only 6% of the US population has scanned a QR code. We think QR codes have a lot of potential, but that's certainly not on a mass scale or scale enough for our business. So we're using a novel technology where you have to scan our logo and the X Factor in a special lockup. It's a very smart, high-definition photo recognition engine that analyzes the photographs sent in to us and then triggers the unlock. So it's only when you have the package can you take the photograph and get access to this. But it's much, much bigger than QR code. And this just hit the market. I think it was hit the market a few days ago. And we are already seeing such great numbers. A lot more people at the end of the day know how to SMS, take photographs, and email than they do how to use QR codes. And then lastly, for us and for our business, participation is linked to sales in a measurable way. At the end of the day, for large brands to think about digital on a mass scale, especially brands that are in the CPG space where we don't sell online or we sell just a minimal amount online, we need to think about our ties to sales, especially if it's a sales-driving program. And initiatives like this allow us to do so. A year ago, the technology wasn't there to enable it. I'd say even 8 months or 6 months ago, it wasn't. Today, it is. It's letting us go scale big. So, and of course, all that content is immensely shareable. And we'll be tracking and really understanding our consumers and knowing what content is shared the most, and every day changing it up, changing it around based on which pieces of content win the content wars, for lack of a better phrase. So a few takeaways from this. One, leveraging physical and digital is a new holy grail. I love digital. I'm digital to the core, but I do live in the physical world, and I recognize that bringing those worlds together does an immense amount. Note, I didn't say marrying traditional advertising or TV advertising with digital. In my mind, that's passé. Everyone should be doing that. The real holy grail is going mass scale, physical and digital. Secondly, every brand is in the media business. We're content creators. It doesn't mean we're media companies, but it does, as I think others have pointed out, create a lot of interesting opportunities. Because when we're sponsors of something, we often have the best access. I know it sounds so selfish and mean, but we do get the best access. That presents new opportunities for us. Engagement wins when there are multiple levels of engagement. It's very easy to think about engagement as a highly deep experience, but we have to think about all the different levels. And then fourth, revolutionary technologies is what's giving us a scale like never before, and we're very excited about that. So that's about scale in new and different ways. The next piece I want to talk about is scale as not mass alone. And this is an interesting one. So for a long time, traditional mass scale marketing looked like this. You know, it would be quite straightforward. Large brands would look at mass engagement. Small brands would look at niche engagement. The bigger the brand, the bigger the budget, the more you'd want to do on the mass scale. You'd go for the biggest celebrities, you'd go for the biggest artists, the biggest platforms, you'd partner with the biggest media companies, you'd partner with the biggest retail partners. You do everything big. It was cool to do big, it was a very macho thing. Big brands meant big business, and you get the sense of what I'm trying to say there. And that's the way the dollars looked like. That was the model at play. Very simple, very straightforward. The bigger the brand, the bigger the ego as well, which played an interesting role in decision-making. That's another story. The world is changing. That's not enough. That's not going to work. Certainly not for, I'd say, the smart brands. So when it comes to the smart brands going on a mass scale, they, I feel, need to operate like this. So marketing at scale tomorrow, it's going to look a little different. The large brands need to participate at the niche level as well. They need to participate in that middle zone as well as they nurture engagement, nurture participation. And then, of course, they need to operate on a mass scale too. So it can't be that large brands equal mass. Large brands need to play a role at every step of the way. And in a world where consumers drive engagement, where consumers are the center of every activity, large brands must absolutely learn how to operate with, I'd say, a tad bit more of humility. And that's a big shift. But that's what's required to operate in this new world of scale. So when it comes to artists and celebrities and platforms and media partners and technologies and you name it, we can't just go for the biggest and the baddest. We have to also partner with the folks who we believe will one day become the biggest and the baddest. We need to be with them every step of the way through that journey, whether they are musicians or they're TV shows or they're startups like Foursquare or their retail partners or their technologies. We have to be at every step of the way. So when brands think about the future, I think it's important for us to think in terms of ourselves as part angel investors, part VCs, part talent management, part media companies, all of the part startups, all of these things at once is the future. And when we look at our dollar spends, instead of spending them really on the big fancy stuff, we have to look at them across every piece. A good example of this is, anyone here does not know who that is? Good. I'm a Lady Gaga fan. The interesting thing about this is, so that's Lady Gaga, and on the left-hand side, that was Lady Gaga in 2005, 2006, when she was nowhere near as big. She was just emerging. Guess what? PepsiCo partnered with her then and used her in our Dear Mr. President advertising. She was just about to break out. We caught her at the right time. 2011, she's now mass. She couldn't be more mass scale, arguably. We do participate with her, do things with her in different ways, sometimes not formally, sometimes more so. But what gives us permission, what gives us credibility, what gives us authenticity is the fact that we were there with her from the beginning. And that's when we think about scale. It's not just going after the Lady Gaga of today, it's going after the Lady Gaga before she's the Lady Gaga, in a sense. Another example, can anyone guess who that is? Great. Well, Sophie Vergara, so she's one of our anchor celebrities for Diet Pepsi. We're doing a lot with her this year. But there's a little known fact that's really interesting. 21 years ago, she was in a Pepsi commercial. 21 years ago, and that's the commercial on the left. We know when we started talking to her about doing something with her this year, the fact that we were there with her 21 years ago made a big difference. In our negotiations and conversations with her. We were there every step of the way. And these are just examples with celebrities, but it applies to everything else, whether it's technology companies, media companies, artists, you name it. It's being that every stage of the way is the new way to think about scale. So some takeaways. Mass brands need to deeply integrate into every part of culture, not just at the mass fancy level. 2, brands don't have money the way they did once. We simply don't have enough money compared to yesteryears. No brand does because of the complexity of the ecosystem. Smart bets matter. Smart early bets matter. 3, one model I think about is the MLB farm system. That's something to think about as you think about nurturing and working with the whole ecosystem. And then lastly, scale means operating at every stage in the growth. So the last key point I want to make, scale only matters if, or it may not matter as much, if we don't pay attention to what I believe is probably the largest trend in marketing over the last few years, and a trend that I'm betting the next few years at least of my career on. That's not me, actually. I know the person looks to me, but that's what I'm doing with this trend. And that is real-time marketing. It's no use operating at scale. It's no use going through those stages. It's no use fostering engagement if you're not doing it in a timely, culturally relevant way. So what's real-time marketing? It's a few things. It's understanding real-time insights, and we have 100 different ways to do this, and every day it gets stronger. It's thinking about real-time response and participation. We know all how to do that, and we've been thinking through that, and we have our teams and our community managers. But it also means a few other things. One, it means developing real-time content studios. What I mean by this is, Lady Gaga, and this was back in March, she reached the point where she had 10 million followers on Twitter. No one knew the exact moment that would happen, but guess what? We were ready for that moment, and we knew what to do because we had a team in place. We had our own mini agency in our building, watching, caring, and ready. And when that moment happened, we were able to mash up content on the fly and build a story around it and congratulate her. Fourth, it means real-time co-creation. It's no use doing something fancy, cool, and quick if you're not involving your consumers. Fifth, it means real-time distribution. As with that X Factor example, what makes it so exciting, if a piece of content is not working, I can instantaneously turn it off and turn something else on. If Lady Gaga hits, 50 million followers, I can distribute that on a mass scale really quickly, whether it's through my physical media or advertising media or through experiences. And then lastly, that's what contributes to real-time engagement. And it all needs to have a geoculture frame. Why this is special and different, I would suggest, is that normally we as large brands, and excuse me for generalizing here, but I can speak for my brand certainly, we typically go through this process over, I'd say, a 5, 8, 9-month time frame. We need to bring that down to a 5, 8, 9-second or 9-minute time frame for us to be culturally relevant. And that's why it's such a big deal and also so challenging. But if we don't do this really quickly, and if we don't do it on mass scale, then we have no resonance. We could be on scale, but it'll have no meaning. What it also means is buying not just against demographics or even psychographics, but buying against trends on the mass scale. So for example, during the MLB All-Star game, we started that evening placing a bet that all the conversation was going to be about the game itself and certain MLB players. Midway through the game, we discovered that there was a mass-scale conversation happening on Facebook about something completely different, and we switched our whole advertising efforts to correspond to that. That's what it means to be operating in real time. It means focusing on geolocation data, which, as we all know, is getting more and more important by the moment, literally. It means leveraging new forms of research. It's no use us doing an immense amount with Lady Gaga if our consumers have no affinity to her or vice versa. Now we have ways of understanding that very quickly on a real-time basis. That presents new opportunities. It also means measuring your brand in real time. So at PepsiCo, we're thinking about new forms of measures of brand health that account for conversation and digital data literally on a real-time basis and track that effectively. So a few takeaways about this. One, writing local, that's a made-up word, please excuse me, culture trends as they're shaped by consumers is what matters. I would even suggest that matters more than operating on scale. We have to do it in real time, the trends that matter. Two, organizing going from strategy to execution in seconds is an imperative. It scares the living daylights out of me, but I feel we have to go there. Three, this may matter more than operating on mass scale, as I mentioned. Fourth, Sometimes, and this is an unusual one, sometimes operating on small scale in 100 or 1,000 places equals mass scale. And we often forget that. But as the media ecosystem gets more and more fragmented, as our worlds are increasingly defined by our Facebook news feeds, which are both mass scale, but hyper personalized, for large brands to operate successfully on scale means go mass, but still try and be hyper-personalized. And the news feed is definitely, I'd say, the role model for that. And that's why at the start of the presentation, I mentioned that Facebook is my most exciting opportunity, but my biggest challenge at the same time. So that's the key takeaways around real-time and its integration into scale. Just to close out, some scale watchouts. As you can see, I tried to be a little extra creative with the slide. I don't know how it worked, but please don't tweet about that. I was trying. I should get points for that. But here are some watchouts. One, scale equals anonymity. It just does. The newsfeed has spoiled us all. It's a challenge each and every time we try to operate on scale, especially as we move beyond the impression and into engagement. And I'm not saying the impression doesn't matter. That's just the starting point, though. But scale, we have to worry about anonymity. Two, scale dilutes the brand often. You lose your differentiation. You lose your resonance. And that's a problem. When each of you in this room think about Pepsi or Mountain Dew or some of our other brands, you all probably have slightly different meanings and memories. That's an absolute wonderful thing. The last thing we'd want to do is take that away from you. The more we do on scale, the more we're at risk of tearing that away. And that's a challenge. Three, every consumer gets treated as equals, even though they aren't. It's a little controversial to say, but we're not all equal. Our consumers aren't all equal. When we operate on a mass scale, we have to be really careful about this. Our loyalists deserve special attention. Their influencers need to be treated in certain ways. We need to think about that. We need to be able to map them out. Fourth, knowing what moves your business gets more and more confusing. Our brands are just on too much scale for us to always understand completely what's moving the business forward. When we leverage digital on scale, it faces those challenges as well. Fifth, technology doesn't always allow you to scale at the pace that you may want to. It does take time to design stuff. It does take time to build stuff. It does take time to produce stuff. I mean, there's a reason why all those media companies are suffering out there. Their businesses are really hard. And as brands enter that world even more, it's not going to be rosy for us either. There are huge challenges associated with it. Next, your agencies, your organization, and your customers may not be ready to operate on scale or in real time. That's a hard thing. The whole ecosystem makeup is a little crazy at the moment. And then finally, when you operate on scale and in real time, mistakes once made can't be fixed easily. Because once you let go, it's out there in the ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple of questions. Want to raise the house lights a little bit?
All right, remember, house rules, stand up, tell us what company you are and who you are, and I'm right here.
Hey, Brad, thank you. Shiv, great presentation. Andy Weedland from BuzzFeed. And I love that idea of real-time trend marketing and aligning against trends, not demos. The interesting thing I find, and I'd like to get your take on it, is the thing about the news is that it's news. Or it's new and you can't control it. And so how much risk are brands willing to take to sponsor the unknown? So if you're sponsoring Lady Gaga and she rolls it in a meat dress, is your CMO going to get mad at you? Or do you have the latitude now that you're going with the trends and making bets?
So I think there are two answers to that. One is, and I never thought this earlier, but a few months ago it struck me, and it doesn't apply to us. But you're typically luckier if your CMO is not big into the internet. It's a strange irony, but it's the truth. So that's sort of one thing. He may not notice what's going on. the other piece, though, is I'd say it's about guardrails. The other is it's about recognition simply of the world that we live in. So yes, there needs to be a massive internal education, but certainly at PepsiCo, we recognize the imperative to be culturally relevant, certainly with brands like Dew and Pepsi and Sobe and even Mist and others. So we're willing to take those risks. Yeah. But it's a tricky one. Yeah.
One more question. Oh, here we go.
Hi Shiv. It's Jory from Blogger. My question is about, so often with brands, there's a dissonance between the brand and the agency, and it's beautiful to see how you view marketing, and how does that translate to your media agency when it is about impressions, it is about click-throughs? How are you educating them, and how are they changing the way they're doing business?
Do I have to talk about that on stage? No, just kidding. I think the truth is we're all going through this change. I mean, we at PepsiCo ourselves are going through the change with growing pains. Our agencies are as well. But I think what it starts with is and that's where the pressure's on us on the brand side, is to tell our agencies that these are the new measures that matter, and that it's not about the click-through rates or just impressions, but we need to share with them our whole marketing plans, explain to them how the media piece fits into it, and say what matters is for the businesses, not just delivering on that component, but helping us deliver on the entirety. So the more we approach and the more we treat our agencies and our media agencies as our true marketing partners, the better place we all end up being and giving them a seat at the table. So it's tricky to get there, but I sort of feel that's the only solution. Yeah.
Round of applause.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.